Hey guys, what's happening? So now we're getting back into Thor, God of Hammers. And for this one, we're going to cover part 2 and 3 in the same video. Because I noticed with anyone I talk to about this series, they'll be like, man, issue 20 and 21, they should have came out back to back. Or they'll say that it should have been just one huge issue. So we'll just cover it that way. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so picking right back up from where we left off, with Thor and Odin finding the Dwarves of Mjolnir just wiped out. But with seeing this, Thor takes the time, and this says a lot about Thor right here, because he takes the time to bury each and every dwarf that he can find, and he buries each of them seemingly in the same way that he does here for Eitri, the Forge Master of Mjolnir. And it's pretty crazy because when he lowers Eitri into the ground, Thor's naming Eitri's brother, his wife, his child, and I wouldn't put it past Thor that for everybody here, every dwarf that he's buried, that he knows them all by name, and he laid them all to rest saying some kind words. Because we can even look back at certain tellings of that moment when Mjolnir was initially forged, and in some of these stories you'll see a young Thor joking around with Eitri and his brother Brock. So you can just imagine over the course of hundreds upon hundreds of years, the history and the kindred that have been formed between Thor and the Dwarves of Mjolnir. But in this moment, while Thor is lowering Eitri into the ground and telling him kind words and telling him like, Eitri, you will be avenged. But then Odin just comes up behind Thor and he tells him that a king cannot rule from his knees, boy. And when Odin says this, Thor gets livid. And he tells Odin that he's gonna do what he pleases. But as for Odin, who Thor addresses as a loyal subject of Asgard, and Thor tells him, you're gonna bite your tongue when you address your king. And Odin's more or less like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do, cry to your mother again? And when Odin says that, Thor then sends Odin into the air of Mjolnir. And on one hand with this happening, you have Odin who's like, okay, well this is getting old, but I'm gonna give this kid a pass. But for Thor, the fact that Odin is kind of lightly joking and not taking this all the way seriously, that in itself really pisses Thor off. Because it's one thing that the forge at Mjolnir is pretty much a graveyard now, but on top of that, what's happening here, this is all Odin's fault, and it goes back to Donald Blake, to where with him learning the truth about his creation drove him to madness, and as a result, people died. Odin's enchantment on Mjolnir, that wore off, and aside from the slaughter at Mjolnir that was done by Mjolnir, it's been causing all kind of chaos and having Thor looking like he can't handle the seat of king of Asgard. But I will also say that at this point, we know that the undoing of Odin's enchantment, whether it's Donald Blake or whether it's Mjolnir, that all of this was called out a while ago by Angela, back when we saw her tell Thor and Odin. The undoing of Odin's enchantments is the entropy that's growing around them, which we know from the introduction of this event, like the entropy is a step in the larger cycle, which means the undoing of Odin's enchantments, that's the last step before eternity, and we're seeing it overlap with the other part of the cycle that is rage, which they're seeing from this point from just looking around Mjolnir, that the rage part of the cycle, it's already begun to go into annihilation. But keep in mind, the cycle itself is something as the reader that we're kind of given just to keep in the back of our mind. So going through this, it's not like Odin and Thor are following along the cycle and picking up any hints. Like, no, not at all. But even with that, there are some things that Odin's aware of as far as what he's done and what this could potentially mean, but even for him, there's a level of uncertainty. But Thor's going off on Odin because it's his fault that this God of Hammers person is out there with Mjolnir, and more death has been brought because of that. And Thor tells Odin, everything's broken, everything you touch, everything you ever made is falling apart. And I'd even make an argument at this point that Thor even feels that way about himself, because for the greater part of this whole series, he's been trying to hold it together. But then in the middle of this, they're then whisked away to Jotunheim by Loki, only to find out that there is more destruction that has been caused by Mjolnir. And when Loki brings them here, he fills them in about Mjolnir not only causing destruction in his kingdom, but also across the 10 realms. And so for us as the reader, we're given like a glimpse of the destruction that had taken place across the different realms, like Alfheim, Svartalfheim with the Dark Elves, where others were just slaughtered, and we were also given a glimpse to some realms like Heaven, to where them and a couple others actually held it down, and it was more of a battle than people just getting wiped out. But with Thor and Odin coming to Jotunheim, Loki brings up what Thor had mentioned before, with him saying let there be peace, so let there be thunder. And with the condition that everything's gotten to now, Loki's like, where's your peace? Where's your thunder? And Thor finishes that statement with asking, where's Mjolnir? Because Thor knows that Loki's been aware of his situation for some time now. Because like we'd seen prior to this, Loki knew that there's trouble in paradise. He heard when Thor got knocked out by his own hammer, and he went to go check on Thor. Thor's like, don't tell nobody about this. But towards the end of that conversation, Thor's leaving. Loki's like, where are you going? And at the time, Thor said, I'm going to end this. To where then we saw Thor head to Captain America and then leave Mjolnir at Avengers Mountain. And even when Thor discovered that Mjolnir was stolen before he went to Sif, he went to Loki, asking for his help to find Mjolnir. And at that time, Loki initially said no, because he has his kingdom to focus on. But fast forward to now with this God of Hammers situation, bringing annihilation to Loki's doorstep, and you can tell with Loki that there's been a shift to where now he realizes that this is everyone's problem. But then it's here where Thor then asks, who is he? Who is the God of Hammers? And Odin just cuts in because he thinks this whole thing is ridiculous. Because in Odin's perspective, the God of Hammers is like a myth or the boogeyman. But then Loki makes a very valid point, because everyone at this table is pretty much a myth, at least to the people of Midgard. And from there, Odin goes on to say why he believes it's a myth, because if he was such a god, and Thor just shuts that down like, look, nobody asked you. But then it's here where Loki lets them know that regardless of what either of them think, the 10 realms believe that this was an attack that came from Asgard, because at the end of the day, this was Thor's hammer. And it's a possibility, like Heaven for example, they may even know that this wasn't Thor's fault. But like Angela said, if the issues of Asgard keep causing problems for everywhere else, then she's coming for the throne. But nonetheless, Loki lets them know that the 10 realms, they're ready for war and they're prepared to make their attack on Asgard. And so far, Loki's been able to hold them back, but that's not something that's gonna last. And it's here where Loki tells the two of them that he doesn't know the details of what's going on between them and their disagreement of whether the God of Hammers is a prophecy or a myth, but Loki lets them know that it's real. And even though Loki hasn't gathered his information from the Tome of Kings like Thor and Odin, but in his case, he searched the universe to find what he could, only to then discover that a lot of this information had been destroyed recently. But for Loki, much of what he did find, it all said the same thing. The God of Hammers will rise, he will ignite the 10 realms, and he will take the last king of Asgard, and then there will be nothing. Nothing but distant sound of a forge burning, raging, as the God of Hammers reshapes the world. And with hearing this, Odin's putting everything together, with the 10 realms being up in arms, as well as these legends that Loki's found, and Odin figures we're gonna have another war of realms. But then Loki tells him, and Thor picks it up pretty quickly, but Loki tells him like it doesn't mean ignite the realms as far as starting a war, but it means ignite the realms literally. But then it's here where Odin tries to tell Thor something, but he doesn't get to say it because immediately the Bifrost opens and it's Sif and Throg who just show up, and they're telling Thor, you have to come with us now. So Thor leaves and he never gets to hear what Odin was about to say. But regardless of whatever it was that Odin was gonna say, I kinda got a feeling that Thor is gonna get that message pretty soon. But with Sif taking Thor from Jotunheim, it takes Thor a moment to realize where he is, but not long after, he sees that he's arrived in Midgard on Earth and he's in Broxton, Ohio. And as far as he can see, there's nothing but destruction. Which for Thor, like, this is another hard hit, much like we talked about with his relationship with the Dwarves at Nidavellir, because after Ragnarok, when Asgard was reestablished on Earth, it was right here in Broxton, Oklahoma. And even though at the time there was a bit of back and forth about the people of Broxton and how they felt about Asgardians just moving in, but nonetheless, these were Thor's neighbors. There was a history in Broxton, and with him arriving here and seeing them slaughtered too, it hits different. And so with Thor seeing this, he calls for Mjolnir. And when he does, it's pretty epic. But when Thor does this and Mjolnir comes racing down from the sky, he sees this and then for a moment he's kind of like, finally. But then like at the last second, he notices that Mjolnir ain't got no brakes, because Mjolnir just comes crashing down on Thor to only then start striking him from each and every direction, which right away just causes Thor to think that whoever's attacking him is either invisible or they're hiding from revealing their identity. So then he calls them out as a coward and he tells them to stop hiding, tell me your name. For him then to hear a voice that says, oh Thor, you know my name. You have always known it. I am the God of Hammers. I am Mjolnir. And it's here where we see the Tempest Storm outside of the hammer. And we find that the Tempest Storm, she's the God of Hammers. But at this point for Thor, he still doesn't understand what's going on. And as far as the Tempest, who's just referring to herself as Mjolnir, she just lays into Thor without much of any explanation at this point. With her throwing the hammer into Thor and knocking him into a lake, or what's left of a lake, in what seems to be an attempt to drown him, with the hammer pushing him deeper and deeper into the water. But with this happening, Thor just calls for lightning and he burns out all the water in the lake, to where then Mjolnir is like, clever. But then from here where Thor starts to ask, who are you? What kind of trick is this? How are you doing this? And it's here where she begins to fill Thor in on a bit of their history. Because as far as Thor being aware of the history of the Tempest Storm, I really don't think he knew, because even if we look back to the different tellings of the origin of Thor, or better yet his initial introduction to Mjolnir, this would be presented in a way to where he was either a child and he would just admire Mjolnir and Asgard, to where in that case Mjolnir was just there. But even at times when we had seen Thor being introduced to Mjolnir at an older age, we'd see him arriving at the forge at Nidavellir, but at a point in time where most of the work was done, with Thor only being aware that the forging of Mjolnir was a gift to Odin, because Odin had previously saved the dwarves from the troll invasion, to where after that Odin enchanted Mjolnir, but to Thor's knowledge, even in this case, that's all Thor knew. And it wasn't like there was a point where Odin had just sat Thor to the side, and he was just like, hey, look here son, there's an ancient Tempest Storm inside of that hammer, so you know what I'm saying, my magic wear off, we in trouble. No, because Odin's always been about results, and he's always justified his actions by the outcomes. And at this point in the bigger picture with the cycle that's going with everything, the rage leading into annihilation has already begun with the God of Hammers, to where then also the rage, it's got a little bit more to go, we gonna get there. But everything that's happening, we're seeing it all follow that larger cycle, and from here it's only getting worse. But it's here where the God of Hammers, she tells Thor, you wounded me, you and I have been together for so long, except for that brief dalliance with Jane, and she tells Thor like, I hope you didn't get jealous. And right there I can just picture Thor being like, scoff. But she tells Thor like, you of all people should know about sowing one's wild oats. And from there she's like, more or less just call it a phase. And I'll tell you right now, there's a word for that type of phase, and we just gonna move along, we not gonna go there. But at this time, with Thor still not fully aware of what's going on, he tells her, you know nothing about me, but get this hammer off of me and you gonna learn. And with Thor saying that, I'll just say right now, you can't threaten nobody that you gonna kick their butt, but before you kick their butt, you need their help so that you can kick their butt. And I mean, I'm not a threats expert, but I just don't think it works like that. But then from here, she removes the hammer and Thor's like, he couldn't breathe. Which again is not the best sound that should be coming out of your mouth after threatening somebody. Like, they're gonna be like, oh, you wheezy, huh? But with doing this, the God of Hammers is like, sure, we can fight if it'll spare me another one of those speeches. And she lets Thor know that that's all it comes down to. The speeches, titles, crowns, thrones, parliaments, and senate meetings, blah blah blah. And she has grown tired of it. And when she lets him up, it's here where Thor calls for lightning, to where then he forms it into a sword, which is something we don't see Thor do that often, which likely is because most of the time in the past he's had Mjolnir, to where then you can tell that Mjolnir doesn't really have the most experience of seeing Thor fight without Mjolnir, aside from a few exceptions. But through the course of the fight at this point, Mjolnir starts moving super fast, and she tells Thor, the God of Thunder, that no one can outrun the lightning. And when she says this and Thor kind of catches her position, he goes to swing, but then she puts up Mjolnir, and the impact just shatters the bones in Thor's forearm. Like they broke out of his arm. Like he looking at his bones looking back at him. And as Thor's looking at this in disbelief, the God of Hammers tells him that I know more than anyone how this must feel. I have been there at your side, in your hand, every single time you have beaten back another gathering storm of death. I have watched for eons. I know of all your deeds and those that you have forgotten. All the times of your triumphs, your secrets, your weaknesses, and yes, Thor, you can be broken. You just have to learn how. But just before the God of Hammers can land a striking blow, Odin steps in, saying let's end this. And the God of Hammers thinks that Odin is talking to her, like he's come out here to die in place of his son. But Odin tells her, I'm not talking to you. And right then, Sif opens the Bifrost, sending the God of Hammers to a location that's just called the farthest place from here. And so now I'm not familiar with this location, and clearly neither is the God of Hammers, because when she gets there and she looks around, like it's looking like Dark Knight's metal out here. Like I don't know what's going on. Like I wouldn't have been surprised if Barbados was just like, ooh, look, a hammer. But with doing this, Odin essentially had Sif send the God of Hammers beyond the furthest point of known existence. And I'll tell you right now, if there was any chance of us getting a secret crisis, it would have had to do something with this place at some point in time. But with sending the God of Hammers here, Thor tells Odin that he fought this thing and that it called itself Mjolnir, and Mjolnir had been brought to life somehow. And it's here where Odin tells Thor the true history of Mjolnir and how he trapped the Mother Storm into that piece of Uru eons ago, and how the dwarves had told him that when they forged that cursed rock into Mjolnir, those that died making it, their voices and their souls, they live on in the hammer itself. But at that time, Odin didn't think much of it. And from here, Odin's kind of telling Thor not to even worry about it, because that hammer at this point, it's on its way back, as they look up and see Mjolnir coming in full speed right back in at him. which Odin had believed shouldn't be possible. But with the hammer heading straight for Thor, Odin pushes Thor out the way, and Odin takes that hit right in the back. And it's bad, like it's really bad, because the god of hammers, she literally blew his back out. Like, I don't know no other way to say it, because that's literally what happened. And with Odin laying here just saying my legs, he's unable to walk, and you can tell that he's just completely out of the fight. And it's here where the god of hammers tells Thor, it hurts, doesn't it? To lose, to be left alone. And with her saying this, Thor asks her why. Why are you doing this? Because at this point, we've seen that Odin's filled in Thor on the details. But even with Thor knowing who the god of hammers is in a practical sense, he still really doesn't know Mjolnir. And it's here where she tells him, you've taken me for granted, you always have, but none of you have ever understood me. And the god of hammers breaks it down, starting with the enchantment, with Thor thinking that the enchantment called for a worthy warrior, someone noble or true of heart. And when she asks Thor, does any of that describe you? Thor don't say nothing, because he know, like, nope, that ain't me. And she tells him, I am a hammer. To be worthy of me is to break, smash, to destroy. And as far as Thor lately with the throne, the crown, the speeches, this isn't the first time that Mjolnir has grown tired of all this. And when she says that, Thor knows that's why Mjolnir went to Jane. And really prior to this, some hammer counseling could have solved this problem, but right now we're past that point. Because when Mjolnir tells Thor, yes, Jane threw me into the sun and you left me broken, you left me to burn. But you see, I wasn't alone in the sun. There was something else there, something powerful, and we burned together. And then we were remade as one. Its spirit became entangled with mine, its soul inside of me. And Thor just says no, because he already knows who it is. And I mean, we know too, and not only just from this huge cycle that's been going, because we saw when Mjolnir went to the sun and who went along for the ride. And now that we know that Mjolnir's had entanglements with this person, you can tell it's just some trouble around the corner. And when she says, I awoke with a voice, with the rage of a billion beings, with the rage of the man Gog. And right there, we find that Mjolnir's rage this whole time has been on a whole nother level. And with Thor looking at this, he is looking at the embodiment of this universal rage that is ready to take it to the next step, which is annihilation. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. All right, later.